The cry behind the victory. The battle was over. Smoke rose from the ruined city as soldiers celebrated and trumpets echoed across the hills. Victory had come, but for one young woman, everything was lost. Among the captives stood Tirzah. Her home was gone. Her family was missing. Her future seemed shattered. Fear filled her heart as she remembered stories of how conquered women were often treated as property, bought, sold, or abused after war. Then a young Israelite soldier named Nathan noticed her standing alone. Tirzah expected the worst, but Israel was different. Unknown to her, God had already given a law through Moses in Deuteronomy, a law designed to protect the dignity of vulnerable captives. As the army marched home, Tirzah walked in fear and uncertainty. What she didn't know was that the God of Israel saw her pain, and that truth was about to change her life forever. To be continued, Part 2. A law unlike any other. Nathan brought Tirzah to his village. The neighbors assumed she would immediately become his possession. That was how surrounding nations operated. No questions, no waiting, no mercy. But Nathan remembered the command written in Deuteronomy. If an Israelite desired a captive woman, he could not treat her as property. Instead, she had to be brought into his home and given time to grieve. An entire month, 30 days, no pressure, no demands, no forced relationship. For the first time since the war, Tirzah was allowed to mourn. She cried for her parents. She cried for her lost homeland. She cried for the life she would never have again. Nathan watched quietly. God's law demanded something unusual: compassion before commitment. The villagers didn't understand why he waited, but Nathan chose obedience over tradition. And as the days passed, Tirzah began to realize something remarkable. She wasn't being treated as a trophy of war. She wasn't being treated as property. She was being treated as a human being. And for the first time since the battle, a small spark of hope began to grow in her heart. To be continued. Part 3. The Month of Tears. Day after day, Tirzah sat beneath an olive tree. The villagers worked, children played, life moved on. But her heart remained broken. Every sunset reminded her of home. Every sunrise reminded her of loss. Yet no one rushed her grief. No one mocked her tears. No one forced her to smile. God's law protected her right to mourn. In a world where the weak were often ignored, the Lord recognized pain. Nathan often left food near her door, not because he expected anything in return, but because he had learned that true strength is shown through kindness. Slowly, Tirzah noticed something different about Israel. Their God cared about people others overlooked: widows, orphans, foreigners, and now, a captive woman. For the first time, hope began to flicker inside her heart. She began to wonder if the God of Israel was truly different from the gods she had always known. But another challenge was coming, one that would test both Tirzah and Nathan. To be continued, Part 4. The Village Whispers. The villagers started talking. Why wait? She's a captive. No one would know. The whispers spread through the marketplace. Many believed Nathan was foolish for following God's command. But Nathan refused to listen. He knew that obedience mattered more than public opinion. One evening, Tirzah overheard the conversations. Fear returned. Would Nathan eventually become like the others? Would his kindness disappear once the month ended? That night she prayed, not to the God she had grown up knowing, but to the God who had protected her, the God of Israel, the God whose laws seemed filled with mercy. As stars filled the sky, Tirzah stared into the darkness and wondered, could a God she barely knew truly care about someone like her? A captive, a stranger, A woman with nothing left. What she didn't know was that the answer was already unfolding before her eyes, and it was closer than she imagined. To be continued. Part 5. The Choice. 30 days passed. The month of mourning had come to an end. The tears had not completely disappeared, but Tirza's heart was no longer filled with the same fear that had followed her from the battlefield. Now came the moment of decision. Nathan stood before her. Tirza braced herself, expecting demands or expectations. Instead, Nathan spoke with kindness and respect. He acknowledged her pain. He recognized everything she had lost. He honored her humanity. For the first time since the war, Tirza felt truly seen, not as a prisoner, not as an outsider, not as a burden, but as a person created with value and dignity. In that moment, she realized that God's law had transformed what could have been exploitation into compassion. The God who gave these commands was unlike the gods she had known. He defended the vulnerable, protected the weak, and demanded justice from those with power. As hope slowly grew in her heart, Tirza began to see the character of God through the actions of Nathan. But life was about to present another challenge, because true character is not revealed when everything is easy. It is revealed when circumstances change. To be continued. Part 6. When feelings change. Months passed. The wounds of war slowly faded, and life settled into a routine. Tirza had begun rebuilding her life among the people of Israel. The fear that once filled her heart was gradually replaced by hope. But not every story unfolds as expected. Nathan began to struggle. The excitement and affection he once felt started to fade. Questions filled his mind, and uncertainty crept into his heart. In many nations of the ancient world, this would not have mattered. A captive woman had no rights, no voice, no protection. She could be sold, traded, or discarded whenever it was convenient. But God's law was different. The command given in Deuteronomy declared that if a man no longer wished to remain with a captive woman he had taken as his wife, he could not sell her. He could not treat her like merchandise. He could not profit from her pain. He had to let her go free. It was a remarkable law in a world where power often ruled over compassion. God was teaching his people a powerful truth. Human beings are not property. They are created with dignity and value. Soon, Nathan would face a choice between personal gain and obedience to God, and Tirza's future would depend on the decision he made. To be continued. Part 7. Freedom without a price. The village waited anxiously to see what Nathan would do. News of his decision had spread quickly, and people gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves. Many expected him to sell Tirza. After all, she had once been a captive, and money could easily be made from such a transaction. That was the way many nations operated. But God's law was clear. No captive woman was to be treated as property. No human life could be reduced to a price tag. Nathan now faced a difficult choice. One path offered financial gain and the approval of many around him. The other required obedience to God. After much thought, Nathan made his decision. He would obey the Lord. Tirza would leave as a free woman. No chains, no debt, no ownership, no conditions, just freedom. As she walked away, the villagers stood in stunned silence. Some could hardly believe what they were witnessing. But through Nathan's obedience, they saw a powerful truth come to life. Human dignity is not earned by status, wealth, or position. It is given by God, and no person has the right to take it away. What seemed like the end of Tirza's story was actually the beginning of a new chapter, one built on freedom, hope, and the justice of God. To be continued. Part 8. The Lesson. The nation needed news of Tirza's story spread beyond the village. What began as a quiet act of obedience in one home was now becoming a message that traveled through the entire nation. At the city gates, elders debated it. In the marketplaces, people repeated it. Even children began asking why Nathan treated a captive woman so differently. Because this story was not just about Tirzah. It was about a law that revealed the heart of God. Israel remembered their own history, how they once cried out in slavery, how they had no voice, no protection, and no future in Egypt. And God had rescued them. Now he was commanding them never to forget what oppression feels like. Nathan's choice was no longer seen as weakness. It was becoming a lesson in obedience. And Tirzah's freedom became more than a personal rescue. It became a national reminder that justice and mercy are not suggestions, but God's heart in action. But even after freedom, Tirzah's journey was not complete. Something deeper was still unfolding. To be continued. Part 9. The God Who Sees. Tirzah walked freely for the first time since the battle. No chains, no guards, no fear. The road ahead was open, but her heart was still learning how to breathe again. At night, silence would return with memories she couldn't fully escape. The smoke rising from her city, the cries that vanished into chaos, the moment everything she knew collapsed in a single day. Yet something inside her was different now. She was no longer invisible. Through Nathan's obedience and the law he followed, Tirzah had discovered something she never expected in the middle of her suffering. She mattered. Not because she earned it, not because she was strong, but because she was seen. For the first time, she understood that the God behind these commands was not distant or indifferent. He placed limits on power so the weak would not be erased. He gave laws so the forgotten would not be crushed. He built justice into a world that could easily ignore pain. Tirzah began to realize that every moment she was protected, every tear she was allowed to shed, every choice Nathan made to honor God instead of culture, was pointing to something greater. A God who notices what others overlook. A God who stays near the broken. A God who sees the ones the world forgets. And slowly, healing began to grow. Not as forgetting her past, but as learning she was not abandoned in it. But her story was not finished yet, because freedom was only the beginning of who she was becoming. To be continued. Part 10. The message that still speaks. Years later, Tirzah's story was still remembered among the people. Not because she was powerful, not because she held a position of honor, but because her life carried a message deeper than history. It revealed the heart of God in a broken world. The law in Deuteronomy was never just about rules written on stone. It was about restraint in moments where power could easily become cruelty. It was about reminding a nation that had once been slaves that memory must shape mercy. Israel had been in chains before. They had cried out with no voice. They had suffered under oppression with no protection, and God had rescued them. So now, they were commanded to live differently, not to repeat the cycle of violence they escaped from. Tirzah's journey became a living testimony that dignity is not something a person earns by strength, beauty, or status. It is something God places upon every human life. And Nathan's obedience showed a truth the village would never forget. Real strength is not seen in control, but in the ability to choose compassion when power says otherwise. Tirzah's freedom was not just her personal rescue. It became a mirror for an entire nation to see itself clearly. Even long after the days of tears and fear had passed, her story continued to speak, because it revealed something timeless. When God is honored, the oppressed are protected. When justice is obeyed, dignity is restored. And when mercy leads, no life is ever truly forgotten. The end.